But in Japan, it's legal to kidnap children. Yes, legal. A bizarre law allows for a disgruntled parent who separates from their spouse to then literally abduct their kids and run off into the night. If there's dispute, co-parenting doesn't exist in Japan. The mother or father who was last living with the children is automatically awarded sole custody. Now, while other countries are free to make up their own rules, no matter how strange, in this case, there are 82 Australian kids innocently caught up in the mess. In a joint 60 Minutes Sydney Morning Herald and Age investigation, North Asia correspondent Eric Bagshaw reports that the seemingly sensible idea of shared custody is as alien to the Japanese as a ban on whaling.
With a population of 37 million, there are more people in Tokyo than any other city in the world. But in every crowd, there are just two faces Scott McIntyre is desperate to spot. His children, Hinata and Haruko.
I mean, it's completely needle in a haystack kind of material, but you never know.
He hasn't seen them since 2019, when they were taken by their mum.
Everywhere I am, I walk and I look, the chances of seeing the kids are, millions to one. But who knows, people win the lottery.
Do you remember what they look like? What they smell like?
No. You don't remember what it feels like to hold them. You don't remember the smells, good or bad. And most difficult of all is you remember what they look like, but you don't know what they look like now. So it's like they're frozen in.
90,000 people are reported missing in Japan every year. Most of them are found or returned home, but thousands of others simply just vanish. It seems they don't want to be found. There's even a word for this phenomenon, johatsu, or evaporation. Many make meticulous plans for their disappearance and cut all ties with their families to build new lives elsewhere. So why do they do it? Where do they end up? Our reporters spoke to investigators, experts, and families who've been left behind to try to shed some light on Japan's evaporated people. Constantin Simon is our reporter. Constantin, this phenomenon, johatsu, is known in Japan. The economic crisis of the 1990s made it worse.
Yes, absolutely. This phenomenon has existed for centuries in Japan, but it's in the 1990s that it really became massive. Why? What happened? Well, first you must remember that after World War II, Japan was a very poor country, destroyed by the war. In just 45 years, Japan rebuilt itself in an impressive manner. So in the 1980s, the economy is booming, people have money, invest in houses and companies. But then come the 90s and the economic crisis, and many fall into debt. They're even threatened by the Yakuza. And so at that point, many feel the only options are suicide or disappearing. And it's then that books even came out to explain how to disappear in Japan.
Constantin, thank you for setting the scene. Let's then take a look at the report by Constantin Simon, Justin Makari, Aruna Papuri, and Yuko Sano.
これ日本の恥だからあんまり言いたくないんですけど、
蒸発したい方は何もかもが嫌になって、そして、リセットっていう言葉がありますけども、別の場所で新しい人生やり直したいと思って。
だから私勝手に自分で出て、家出みたいなもんですね。家出っていうかもうあかんで自分の人生も。でも家出ですね。蒸発です。はい、そう蒸発です。ここは大阪西成区のね、通称釜ヶ崎愛林地区のところですね。はっきり聞いたわけなんですけど、7、8割は皆さん 蒸発してどっかからね、8割ぐらいですね蒸発してますねそうですここ来たらなんとかなるのねいろいろ話聞いてきてるからみんなねあちこちでねその自分の住んでる
Is still with us. Thank you so much for that insight. Great report, Constantin. Not a straightforward piece to shoot, I imagine.
It was a very complicated story to film. Very complicated to get people to speak out. People who have specifically chosen to cut all ties with society. But in the end we managed, and we got to meet someone who had disappeared. We had to meet him by night in the streets of the Kamagasaki neighborhood in Osaka. I was quite shocked because it's a neighborhood where you see people sleeping out on the streets, and that's very rare in Japan because you see very few homeless people here. Of course, poverty exists, but it's hidden. You don't beg here, it's just not done. But in Kamagasaki, you can see all that, as if all the poor and the outcasts of Japan were gathered in one neighborhood. It was also very complicated to talk to the families, because on the one hand, they want to talk, to speak out, so that maybe the disappeared person sees the report or someone gives information to them. But at the same time, there is the terrible shame and the psychological distress that pushes them not to take part.
Is it really true that more people disappear in Japan than anywhere else? I imagine that this phenomenon in some way, shape or form exists in other countries.
Of course, people go missing everywhere in the world. It's a question of figures. If you follow the official government counts, between 80,000 and 90,000 people disappear every year. Now, most of those people are found in the end, so in that sense it doesn't seem to be more than elsewhere. But when you talk to associations, to specialists, you realize that most of these disappearances are not declared to the police. Why? Because people are ashamed or because they know police won't investigate. The huge majority of these disappearances are voluntary. But Japan is also a country with an aging population. Many disappear because of mental health issues. It's a very complex phenomenon. But in Japan, these disappearances are accepted, as if people had redeemed themselves by disappearing.
Constantin Simon, thank you for the story.